Segment 3, the war abroad. Pakistan. Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, this is just in the last few days, quote, "The Pakistani ruling bargain is set by the Pakistani army. We let you civilians pretend to rule, but we will actually call all the key shots and we will consume 25% of the state budget. Looking for bin Laden became a side business for Pakistan's military to generate American aid." They played us, Michael.
Well, that's a very clever statement. It's probably a little bit of an oversimplification. But there's no question that Pakistan has been a very challenging ally, and it's been an imperfect ally. As they will tell you, and I think there's some justification, they have been very helpful to us sometimes. But it's also clear that there have been times they have not been helpful. I think the jury is still out on what happened with bin Laden, but certainly there are serious questions about how he could be where he was located for years without some high-level support. I don't mean at the very top.
Do we turn the screws on them?
Well, so let me come to the other side. The other side of it is that our supply line into Afghanistan comes through Pakistan. We have had the benefit of their assistance in capturing a number of high-level people. So, and remember, the Chinese are always in the wings, waiting to say to the Pakistanis, dump the Americans and come over and work with us, and we'll give you everything that you want.
Right.
So we're in a situation where we don't have total control. And I think, as most people have said, it's got to be a combination of tough and love, meaning we have to assist and encourage good behavior, but we also have to call out and be tough when there's bad behavior. Now, I think the president actually, in this case, did the right thing. There was an opportunity to strike at bin Laden. He took the opportunity. He knew it was going to offend the Pakistanis, and he did it nevertheless. And I think we have to be willing to do that. But I think we also have to be careful not to put them in a position.
Don't force them to choose.
Right, exactly. Right. Don't force them to choose, and then choose to be our adversaries rather than our allies.
Saudi Arabia. Once again, I'm quoting Thomas Friedman. Same column, actually, in the New York Times. The Wahhabis, this is the conservative or extreme, or call it what you will, Islamist sect. The Wahhabis bless the Saudi regime with legitimacy in the absence of any elections, and the regime blesses them with money. During the 1980s alone, this is staggering. During the 1980s alone, Saudi Arabia spent some $75 billion on the propagation of Wahhabism throughout the Arab world. Close quote. Why do we put up with that?
So let's go back to 79, 80. After the Khomeini takeover, there was an attack on Mecca. Right. And it had to be put down in a rather brutal way. And I think that alarmed the monarchy. And at that time, the arrangement that they made essentially was to buy peace with those who were very much on the fundamentalist side of the religious spectrum. Now, since that period of time, I think Saudi Arabia has evolved. And I think under the current king, it has been comparatively reformist in terms of the leadership of the country, and certainly a terrific ally of the U.S. I mean, since 2003, when they themselves were attacked by al-Qaeda, they have become full-throated partners with the U.S. in counterterrorism. Unlike the Pakistanis, where it's sometimes one hand gives and one hand takes away, the Saudis have been really joined at the hip with us.
They're still spending money, though, are they not? Spreading Wahhabism?
So the challenge we have is this. As counterterrorism partners, I would give them an A+.
They'll share intelligence. They're bad guys in Saudi Arabia.
Tough,
they go get them.
And they're actionable. And they actually have a pretty good program for trying to rehabilitate people. But there's no question that there's a certain part of the establishment in Saudi Arabia that has very fundamentalist religious views, and that there's a kind of a pull and push or a tug of war between that group and the group that would be described as more reformist. That being said, I think there has been incremental change in the direction of greater freedom for women and more tolerance over the last few years. And to me, this is an example of a case where we ought to be encouraging.
And time is with us.
Time is with us.
The rising generation is more reformist.
I think that's right.
Egypt, population of 80 million, by far the most populous Arab nation. Islamic scholar Bernard Lewis, and this is his comment, he's commenting shortly after the fall of Mubarak, quote, "The religious parties," he's talking about the Muslim Brotherhood above all, "the religious parties have an immediate advantage. They have a network of communication through the preachers and the mosques which no other political tendency can hope to equal. In genuinely free and fair elections, the Muslim parties are very likely to win, and I think that would be a disaster," close quote. Now, what he's saying, genuinely free and fair elections, is just what anybody listening approvingly to President George W. Bush's second inaugural address would have said, yes, this is it, free and fair elections. And Bernard Lewis incomparably the most outstanding scholar of Islam says, no, that will be a catastrophe. Square that circle.
Well, first of all, Egypt is a more complicated answer than a one-sentence answer. No question right now the Muslim Brotherhood, because it is perhaps the only institution that exists outside the army, has an advantage. Whether that will erode over time, whether within the Brotherhood generational differences will wind up coming to the surface, I think it's too soon to tell. But clearly, the outcome here is by no means clear. It could be a bad outcome as well as
the Army's going ahead with elections in September.
Right, and the people voted to support that, by the way, by an overwhelming majority. So
Right.
it wasn't that the Army pushed that down the throats of the people. So that's kind of a work in progress, and we don't really know how it's going to come out. In terms of the question of democracy and voting, I would argue that when we talk about freedom, we don't just mean going to the polls with an election.
Mm-hmm.
We mean setting up the framework and the conditions for freedom. And that's why I've said on other occasions, ideally you want a transition. You don't want to just jump from a dictatorship right into an election the next day. And what do I mean by a transition? First, you want the rule of law. Mm-hmm. You want to have a basic framework. You want to have freedom of speech. You want to give people an opportunity to organize and to debate. And you want to give them the conditions that they need to have confidence that they'll have a free election. When that happens, I think elections are very good.
All of that Mubarak refused to countenance.
Correct, and that's and one of the challenges that we had was by refusing to make changes in the direction of opening up, he created a situation, and maybe he did it on purpose, where the alternative was either him or the one other organized group outside the army, which was the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right. Libya, last question on the war abroad. Libya, from your recent op-ed in the Washington Post, quote, the staying power of Gaddafi's forces suggests that the current fight, largely seen at the outset as Democrat versus oppressor, might have a darker tribal underlay, close quote. Should NATO take out Gaddafi and get it finished, manage the current stalemate, or withdraw from Libya?
Well, now we're in it. So these are questions one would have asked at the beginning. And the rest of the op-ed talked about what happens if we win, if we do kill Gaddafi. And what Mike Hayden and I, who co-authored the article with me, former CIA director, what we suggested is, it's not obvious that getting rid of Gaddafi ends the problem, any more than getting rid of Saddam Hussein ended our problems in Iraq. And who is going to own bringing peace to Libya if after Gaddafi falls, he winds up having armed his allies, and we wind up with insurgencies and car bombs and sniping and all the other elements of disorder that we saw in Baghdad in 2003. Now we've got to start planning for that because we don't know how this is going to turn out.
The sentence that you and General Hayden left out was, isn't it ironic that the very people who pilloried the Bush administration for failing to prepare for the post-war situation in Iraq are now failing to prepare in Libya? You're just too nice a guy, Michael.
Well, maybe
you had a shot there. You had a punch that you pulled.
I wasn't interested in making shots. What I was interested in doing is saying, it's not too late to start thinking this through. It would have been better to think it through at the very beginning, but it looks like this stalemate may continue for a while. We need to think through what are we going to do when it turns out one way or the other, because I think washing your hands of this is not going to be an option.